He was thrown out of the restaurant, humiliated in front of everyone. But they didn't know he owned the place. Stay with us until the very end, because what Liam Neeson does next will leave the entire room speechless. The restaurant sparkled under the weight of its own reputation. Crystal glasses chimed softly, silverware tapped delicate plates, and the low hum of polite conversation wrapped the room in an invisible cocoon of status. Outside, the night was sharp with cold, the kind that cuts through thin jackets and lingers in the bones. And then the door opened. At first, no one noticed. Not really. The hostess raised her eyes with automatic precision, but hesitated, lips parting slightly. Conversations faltered mid-sentence, forks paused mid-air. Slowly, a man stepped into the warmth. His clothes were worn, frayed at the sleeves, the kind of fabric that had given up years ago. His boots were battered, soles peeling. His hair was a tangled mix of grey and dirt, his beard thick, unkempt, hiding most of his expression. But his eyes, they were sharp. He stood at the entrance for a heartbeat too long, scanning the room, his chest rising with the slightest trembling breath. The smell of freshly baked bread, roasted meats, and expensive wine filled the air, wrapping the guests in comfort he hadn't known in years. And then, slowly, deliberately, he moved forward. The hostess tensed. A waiter froze, napkin in hand. A pair of men in suits at the corner table chuckled under their breath, nudging each other as if this was the evening's unexpected entertainment. The man stopped at the counter, resting his weathered hands on the polished wood. His fingers trembled ever so slightly. The room's energy shifted, not openly hostile, but something worse, amused. The manager emerged from the back like a shark tasting blood in the water. Tailored suit, slicked back hair, a grin sharpened by years of practice. He didn't need to speak. His eyes said it all. He approached the counter with theatrical grace, scanning the room to ensure his audience was watching. One hand casually adjusted his cufflinks, the other landed lightly on the counter beside the man's hands. Without a word, the man lifted his gaze. There was no anger there, no desperation, only stillness. A stillness so profound, it unsettled the manager more than he cared to admit, but that didn't stop him. The manager leaned in slightly, lowered his voice, and gestured toward the door. His smile widened, not kindly but cruelly. He was the kind of man who believed that image was everything, that luxury had no place for pity, that success meant keeping the dirt out, even when the dirt had a face and a name. The guests pretended not to watch, but every pair of eyes flicked toward the scene, waiting for the punchline. The waiter who had frozen earlier stepped forward slightly, lips parting as if to intervene, but the manager's sharp glance pinned him in place. The homeless man stood there silent. He made no argument, no plea. He simply exhaled, shoulders rising and falling once, then twice. He looked around the room, memorizing every corner, not with the hunger of a man begging for scraps, but with the gaze of someone measuring something much larger. And then, without a word, he turned and walked away. The door swung shut behind him, leaving a thin whisper of cold air in his place. Inside, the manager clapped his hands once, theatrically. "And that's how we keep the standards high," he declared, voice dripping with satisfaction. Laughter rippled softly through the room. The waiter looked down at his shoes, shame tightening his chest. At the corner table, the old woman who had been dining quietly leaned toward her companion. "He looked familiar," she murmured, brows furrowed, but her voice was lost under the hum of conversation. Laughter rising again, glasses clinking once more. Outside, under the dim glow of the street lamp, the homeless man walked slowly to the edge of the parking lot. His breath steamed in the cold night air, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. And then, pausing beside a battered old sedan, he reached into his coat. Not for money, not for food, but for a phone. The screen flickered faintly, the kind of older model most would have long replaced. His fingers, though rough and scarred, moved with precise control as he dialed a number from memory. He lifted the phone to his ear. A pause. A soft voice answered on the other end. He spoke just 3 words, and then he slipped the phone back into his coat, turned slowly toward the glowing windows of the restaurant, and let a small, knowing smile tug at the corner of his mouth. Inside, the manager laughed again, backslapping one of the guests, completely unaware. Outside, under the vast, cold night, Liam Neeson stood silent, watching his own restaurant, watching the arrogance, the cruelty, the false confidence swirling inside, and knowing that by tomorrow, everything would change. As Liam turned to leave, headlights flared at the end of the street, slowing as they approached. A sleek black car, windows tinted, pulled up beside him. The window rolled down just a crack, and inside, a voice spoke quietly, "It's time." The night gave way to morning with the kind of cold grey light that seeps into bones before it touches skin. The restaurant, now quiet and dark, held the echoes of last night's laughter, sealed behind locked doors and polished glass. But outside, the city stirred, and Liam Neeson had not slept. In a modest apartment on the edge of town, he sat at a small kitchen table, the surface scratched from years of use, a steaming cup of black coffee untouched before him. His phone rested nearby, its screen dark now, but its weight undeniable. He had watched everything last night, not just from the doorway. Weeks of observation, silent visits, unseen checks. He had slipped through his own establishment unnoticed, dressed simply, disappearing into corners, sitting at side tables, sometimes standing outside in the cold, just to see how his staff, his managers, his people treated those they thought were beneath them. He remembered when he first bought the place. Back then, it wasn't a symbol of status or power. It was a dream, a place where families could gather, where the food mattered more than the facade, where kindness was the secret ingredient that made customers return. But slowly, over time, he had let it slip, trusted too many smiles, delegated too much, and now arrogance had bloomed where integrity once stood. Outside the apartment, the city yawned awake. Delivery trucks rumbled through narrow streets, vendors set up their stalls, and the pale winter sun clawed its way above the rooftops. Liam sat unmoving, eyes locked on nothing, mind racing through memories. The way the manager had smiled while pushing him away. The way the waiter had hesitated but said nothing. The way the guests had chuckled, too comfortable to care. He stood slowly, his body creaking, not from age, but from the weight of disappointment. He reached for his coat, slipping it over his shoulders, then paused, fingers brushing against the small plaque on the shelf near the door. A dedication in his name marking the restaurant's opening years ago. He picked it up, thumb brushing over the engraved words, "A place for everyone." He smiled faintly, almost bitterly. By the time he stepped onto the street, the day was alive. He moved with purpose, not drawing attention, yet eyes sharp, catching every detail. The cafe owner across the street greeted him with a nod, unaware of his identity. The local shopkeeper called out to a passerby, paying him no mind. Liam blended in perfectly, just another quiet figure in the crowd. Back at the restaurant, preparations were underway. Today was important. Investors, media connections, potential partners, all scheduled for a grand dinner tonight. The manager strutted through the space, barking orders, adjusting floral arrangements, making sure the lighting hit the tables just right. He didn't notice the quiet shift in energy as Liam passed by the windows outside, watching. Inside, the nervous waiter from last night polished glasses mechanically, his mind elsewhere. His conscience prickled. The memory of the homeless man's eyes haunted him. He had wanted to help, to offer something, anything, but fear had pinned him. Fear of losing his job, of crossing the arrogant manager, of stepping out of line. Liam watched him through the window, saw the tightness in his shoulders, the way his hands shook slightly when no one was looking. He saw the small cracks in the polished surface of the restaurant, the fractures hidden beneath the glamour. As the afternoon wore on, Liam made his way to a quiet meeting spot, a dimly lit office above a small coffee shop, away from the eyes of the public. There, his closest legal advisors waited. They greeted him not as a stranger, but with respect. Papers were laid out, details reviewed. Liam's instructions were clear: no outbursts, no public shaming, no headlines. Just quiet, precise correction, the kind that reshaped everything from the inside out. As evening approached, the city glittered under streetlights, windows glowing warmly against the winter dark. The restaurant shone brighter than most, a jewel of elegance amid the shadows. The manager stood near the door, checking his reflection one last time, adjusting his tie, rehearsing his charm. Inside, tables were perfectly set, candles flickered gently, and the nervous waiter whispered anxiously to a colleague, "Do you think he'll come back, that man from last night?" But no one knew. No one suspected. Not yet. Because Liam Neeson was already watching, already waiting, already preparing to walk through that door, not as a silent figure in worn clothes, but as the man they had all forgotten, the man they had laughed at, the man who owned the very ground they stood on. As the restaurant's clock ticked closer to dinner time, the manager pulled out his phone, checking messages from investors, smiling smugly. He didn't see the notification lighting up on the office computer upstairs. A new reservation, placed quietly, under a familiar name. The last name he ever expected to see tonight. Neeson. The restaurant gleamed like a polished gem under the city's night sky. Soft golden lights framed the windows, tables shimmered with crystal and silver, and the scent of carefully crafted dishes floated in the air like a silent promise of perfection. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with an eager tension. Staff hurried back and forth, smoothing tablecloths, adjusting centerpieces, lighting candles with trembling hands. Tonight was supposed to be flawless. The night when investors arrived, when deals were whispered over glasses of vintage wine, when the manager's ambitions finally stretched beyond the walls he pretended to command. He stood at the center of it all, radiating confidence. His tailored suit hugged his frame just right, his hair slicked back to perfection. He moved through the dining room like a conductor orchestrating a symphony, making sure every note landed exactly as he wanted. He had worked too hard, climbed too fast, to let anything threaten tonight. The doors opened one by one, and the evening's guests arrived. Men and women dressed in sharp suits, elegant gowns, laughter like music at their lips. The manager greeted them personally, shaking hands, offering rehearsed smiles, guiding them to the best tables. He soaked in their compliments, fed on their approval. But in the back of his mind, a faint unease flickered. A shadow of last night's interruption. That homeless man, that face, that unsettling calm. He brushed it off, shaking away the thought. Tonight was his moment. Nothing would touch it. And then, just as the first course was being served, the door opened again. At first, no one noticed. No one turned. But the hostess at the front froze. Her eyes widened, lips parting slightly as she tried to summon a word that refused to come. The waiter polishing glasses near the bar inhaled sharply, his hands trembling. Liam Neeson had walked in, not as the man from last night, not as the figure in worn clothes, not as the quiet presence they dismissed. Tonight, he moved with quiet command, dressed simply but sharply, his tall frame cutting through the room like a blade through silk. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to explain. His presence alone rewrote the energy of the room. Conversations slowed, forks paused, glasses hovered mid-air. People turned one by one as recognition dawned. The manager's smile faltered, eyes narrowing slightly. Confusion flickered across his face, followed by something colder. Fear. Liam approached calmly, every step measured, every glance deliberate. He stopped at the reservation table, where the hostess still stood frozen and with a single nod confirmed his presence. She stammered, eyes wide, and gestured hurriedly toward the reserved table in the center of the room, the one meant for the investors. But Liam didn't need a table, because at that moment, the investors were already rising from their seats, smiles spreading across their faces, hands outstretched eagerly. They didn't rush to greet the manager. They didn't glance toward the polished decor or the carefully prepared meals. They went straight to Liam. The manager's heart pounded. His face tightened into a controlled mask, the kind he had used for years to hide panic behind charm. He stepped forward, attempting to intercept, to reclaim control. But the investors barely noticed him. One of them, an older man with sharp eyes and a relaxed smile, turned slightly. "Ah, you must be the manager," he said smoothly. "I trust you've been taking good care of things here." The manager's throat tightened. His words caught, half-formed, as Liam's eyes locked onto his. Calm, steady, unreadable. And in that moment, the manager knew. He knew who had been watching. He knew who had been measuring every crack, every weakness, every act of cruelty dressed up as authority. He knew that tonight was not the victory he had planned. Tonight was the reckoning. As Liam sat down gracefully at the head of the main table, the investors gathered eagerly around him, leaving the manager standing awkwardly to the side. And just as the waiter approached nervously to pour the wine, Liam leaned back slightly, his eyes flicking once, just once, toward the embarrassed, frozen figure across the room. He didn't say a word, but his small, knowing smile said everything. The air inside the restaurant had shifted. It was no longer filled with shallow laughter or the clink of polished glass. It was heavy now, thick with realization, tension, and the sharp edge of unspoken truths. Liam Neeson sat calmly at the head of the table, surrounded by the very investors the manager had dreamed of impressing. But all the attention, all the smiles, all the conversations, they belonged to Liam. The manager stood frozen near the back, his smile cracking at the edges, his hands fidgeting as if grasping for invisible reins that no longer existed. He tried to step forward once, twice, but every attempt was gently, devastatingly intercepted. A polite nod from one investor, a quiet comment from another, all waves, all focus, redirected back to Liam, and Liam never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He spoke softly, warmly, answering questions, sharing stories of the restaurant's early days, weaving a picture of what the place was meant to be, not just a business, but a space of dignity, care, and inclusion. His voice carried the weight of ownership, not just of a name on a deed, but of a vision, a soul, a purpose. Meanwhile, the manager's mind raced. He remembered every moment he had dismissed, every small cruelty he had justified, every choice made in the name of standards that now crumbled before his eyes. And then, when the main course was cleared and the room quieted just slightly, Liam rose. He didn't slam his hands on the table. He didn't call for attention. He simply stood, tall, composed, his presence alone commanding the silence that spread like a wave through the room. The investors turned. The staff froze. Even the guests, sensing a shift they couldn't quite name, fell into hush. Liam's eyes found the manager's, and in that gaze, something deep stirred. Not anger, not vengeance, but something more profound. Disappointment. Without a word, Liam gestured gently, and one of the investors nodded. A legal advisor appeared at his side, placing a thin folder on the table. Papers, documents, transitions. The manager's chest tightened. His face paled. He understood. This wasn't a public shaming. It was worse. It was a quiet, absolute correction. His time was over. Liam didn't humiliate him, he simply removed him. The staff watched, wide-eyed, as Liam spoke briefly with the team, acknowledging the efforts of those who had tried. The hesitant waiter, the overworked kitchen staff, the quiet faces who had been too afraid to speak. To them, Liam offered a new beginning, an invitation to rebuild the restaurant into what it was always meant to be. The room, once a stage for arrogance and control, became a place of silent reckoning and quiet justice. And when it was done, when the final papers were signed and the investors smiled approvingly, Liam stepped outside. The cold air wrapped around him like an old friend. He breathed it in deeply, exhaling the tension of a night that had been building for far too long. Across the street, under the dim light of a lamppost, a small figure waited. A child, no more than 10, wrapped in a worn jacket, watching the glowing restaurant with wide, hungry eyes. Liam approached slowly, kneeling down to meet the child's gaze. From his pocket, he pulled a small, folded envelope and pressed it gently into the boy's hand. Without fanfare, without witnesses, without applause, Liam whispered softly, not words of charity, but of invitation. An invitation to come, to eat, to be seen. Because in the end, it was never about reclaiming power. It was about restoring dignity. It was about making sure no one was left standing in the cold, unseen, unheard. As Liam walked away into the night, his figure dissolving into the quiet streets, the boy looked down at the envelope, eyes wide with wonder. And inside the restaurant, the staff gathered nervously, realizing that tomorrow would be a completely different world, one where their true values would finally be tested. The story was far from over. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join our channel for more powerful, inspiring stories every week. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And share this video with someone who believes true power comes from quiet strength. Until next time, thank you for watching.